In the small, quiet town of Willow Creek, life moved at a slow and predictable pace. Nestled between thick forests and gentle hills, it was the kind of place where everyone knew each other's names, and nothing exciting ever seemed to happen. That is, until strange rumors began swirling about Emily Carter, a girl who had died tragically over 2 decades ago. Emily's story was one that older residents often told in hushed tones. She was just 16 when she drowned in the nearby river, leaving behind a legacy of sorrow and unanswered questions. The official report labeled her death as an accident, but whispers persisted among the townsfolk. Some claimed they saw Emily wandering near the cemetery late at night, her pale figure glowing faintly under the moonlight. Others swore they heard soft laughter coming from her gravesite, a sound both eerie and heartbreaking. While many dismissed these tales as mere superstition or wild imagination, there were those who couldn't shake off the feeling that something wasn't quite right. Henry Thompson was one such person. A middle-aged man with a passion for history, Henry spent most of his free time poring over old books and documents, piecing together forgotten stories of Willow Creek. He was known around town as the go-to guy if you wanted to know anything about its past. But this time, Henry wasn't just curious. He felt compelled to dig deeper into Emily's story. There was something about the way people spoke of her, almost reverently yet fearfully, that tugged at him. It wasn't just idle gossip. It was as though the entire town carried a collective guilt, buried deep beneath layers of silence. Determined to uncover the truth, Henry started by visiting the local library, where dusty archives held fragments of the town's history. He sifted through yellowed newspaper clippings, searching for any mention of Emily's death. What he found was puzzling. Most articles repeated the same narrative. Emily had gone swimming alone in the river on a summer evening and never resurfaced. Her body was recovered days later, and the tragedy was ruled an unfortunate accident. Yet, tucked away in the corner of one article was a quote from a witness who claimed to have seen Emily arguing heatedly with someone near the riverbank earlier that day. Another source hinted at suspicious circumstances surrounding her drowning, but offered no concrete evidence. These inconsistencies gnawed at Henry. If Emily's death truly was an accident, why did so many details seem out of place? To get a clearer picture, Henry decided to speak directly to the people who remembered Emily. He visited elderly residents, sitting patiently in their living rooms as they recounted memories of the young girl. One woman described Emily as bright and full of life, always eager to help others. Another recalled how Emily loved spending hours sketching by the river, her laughter echoing through the trees. But when Henry asked about the night of her death, their expressions darkened. Some hesitated, choosing their words carefully, while others flat out refused to discuss it. "It's best not to stir up old wounds," one man said cryptically. Before closing his door, despite the resistance, Henry pressed on. His curiosity only grew stronger with every incomplete answer. Then one afternoon he met Mrs. Eleanor Briggs, a frail woman in her late 70s who lived alone on the edge of town. Unlike the others, Eleanor didn't shy away from talking about Emily. Over cups of tea in her cozy kitchen, she shared a detail that sent chills down Henry's spine. "Emily wasn't safe here," Eleanor said softly, her eyes clouded with sadness. "There were people watching her, controlling her. I don't think she fell into that river by accident." Eleanor's words lingered in Henry's mind long after he left her house. Who were these people she mentioned? And what exactly had they been doing to Emily? The more he thought about it, the more convinced he became that the answers lay somewhere beyond the surface, in a place few dared to look. By now, Henry's obsession with Emily's story had taken hold of him completely. Sleepless nights became routine as he pored over maps, photographs, and handwritten notes, trying to connect the dots. Every clue led back to one undeniable fact. Emily's death wasn't what it seemed. One evening, as twilight painted the sky in hues of orange and purple, Henry stood outside Willow Creek Cemetery. The air was crisp, carrying with it the faint scent of pine. He glanced around nervously, half expecting someone to stop him. Graveyards weren't meant to be disturbed, especially not in a town like Willow Creek where tradition and superstition ran deep. But Henry couldn't ignore the nagging voice inside him telling him to keep going. Something, or someone, was waiting beneath the soil, and he needed to find out what. With trembling hands, Henry grabbed a shovel from the trunk of his car and made his way to Emily's grave. It was marked by a simple stone weathered by time, bearing only her name and the years of her short life. For a moment he hesitated, guilt washing over him. Desecrating a grave felt wrong, disrespectful even. But then he reminded himself why he was here. This wasn't about disturbing the dead. It was about seeking justice for a girl whose voice had been silenced far too soon. Taking a deep breath, Henry plunged the shovel into the ground. The earth was damp and yielded easily, but the work was grueling. Beads of sweat formed on his forehead as he dug deeper, his muscles aching with each thrust. The world around him faded away, leaving only the rhythmic sound of metal hitting soil. Hours passed, and just when exhaustion threatened to overwhelm him, the shovel struck something solid. His heart raced as he knelt down and brushed away the dirt, revealing the wooden lid of a coffin. Henry's hands trembled as he pried open the casket, bracing himself for what he might find. But instead of skeletal remains or decayed clothing, he was met with emptiness. The coffin was completely bare, as if it had never held a body at all. Stunned, Henry sat back on his heels, his mind racing. Who, or what, had been buried here? And where was Emily's body? The discovery left him with more questions than answers, but one thing was certain. The mystery of Emily Carter was far from over. Henry stared at the empty coffin, his mind reeling. The silence of the graveyard pressed down on him, broken only by the distant hoot of an owl and the rustling of leaves in the cool night breeze. His hands were dirty. His muscles ached from hours of digging, but none of that mattered now. All he could think about was the gaping hole before him, literally and figuratively. What did this mean? Who had gone to such lengths to fake Emily's death? And why? He carefully climbed out of the grave, brushing soil off his jeans as best he could. The flashlight flickered slightly, casting long shadows across the cemetery. Henry glanced around nervously, half expecting someone, or something, to appear, out of the darkness. This wasn't just some harmless curiosity anymore. It felt like he'd stepped into a mystery far bigger than himself. Every instinct told him to leave, to forget what he'd seen and go back to his quiet life. But he couldn't. Not now. Something deep inside him refused to let go. As he drove home, his thoughts raced faster than the car's headlights, cutting through the winding roads. The empty coffin gnawed at him. If Emily hadn't been buried here, then where was she? Was she even dead? The questions swirled endlessly, each one more unsettling than the last. When he finally pulled into his driveway, exhaustion hit him like a wave. Still, sleep wouldn't come easily, not with so many unanswered mysteries swirling in his head. The next morning, Henry woke up groggy but determined. He needed answers, and he knew exactly where to start looking. His attic. It was a cluttered space filled with boxes of old family belongings, dusty photo albums, and forgotten trinkets. For years he'd meant to clean it out, but never found the time. Now, though, he hoped it might hold clues to the puzzle haunting him. With a steaming cup of coffee in hand, Henry climbed the creaky stairs to the attic. Sunlight streamed through the small window, illuminating clouds of dust motes floating lazily in the air. He began rummaging through the piles of boxes, opening lids and sifting through their contents. Most of it was junk. Old receipts, broken toys, faded Christmas decorations. But then, tucked away in the corner behind a stack of musty books, he found something that made his heart skip a beat. A leather-bound diary. The diary belonged to his late grandmother, Margaret Thompson. Henry remembered her vividly, a kind woman with silver hair and a knack for storytelling. She'd often regaled him with tales of Willow Creek's history when he was a child. Opening the diary, he flipped through its yellowed pages, scanning entries written in her neat flowing handwriting. At first, they seemed ordinary enough, accounts of daily life, weather patterns, and recipes she wanted to try. But as he turned further, the tone shifted. Some entries mentioned Emily Carter. One passage caught his eye immediately. I'm worried about Emily. She confided in me today, said she feels trapped. I don't know what to do, they're watching her. Henry froze, his fingers tracing over the words. They? Who were they? And what had Emily been trapped by? He read on eagerly, hoping for more details. In another entry, Margaret wrote, Emily came to see me again. She says she can't stay here much longer. Something bad is going to happen if she does. I wish I could help her, but I'm afraid too. The fear in her words was palpable, even decades later. Whoever they were, they clearly held power over people in the town, including Emily. Henry felt a chill run down his spine. What kind of danger had Emily been in? Had she tried to escape? And if so, had she succeeded? Determined to piece together the rest of the story, Henry kept reading. One entry stood out above all the others. There's talk of a group, an order they call it. They've been here for years, pulling strings behind the scenes. No one speaks openly about them, but everyone knows their name. I pray Emily stays safe. The order. That phrase sent a jolt of recognition through Henry. Over the years, he'd heard vague rumors about a secret society operating in Willow Creek, but he'd always dismissed them as nonsense. Could this be the same group Margaret referred to? If so, what role had they played in Emily's disappearance? By the time Henry finished reading the diary, his head was spinning. This wasn't just a tragic accident or a ghost story. It was a conspiracy rooted deep within the town's history. Someone had gone to great lengths to cover up the truth about Emily, and Henry suspected the order was involved. But how could he prove it? More importantly, who else might know something? Over the next few days, Henry became consumed by the need to uncover more. He started visiting older residents of Willow Creek, seeking anyone who might have known Emily personally. Many were reluctant to talk, their eyes darting nervously as if afraid of being overheard. One elderly man slammed the door in Henry's face after hearing Emily's name. Another woman simply shook her head and muttered, "Some things are better, left alone." But not everyone turned him away. Ruth Harper, a reclusive widow in her 80s, agreed to meet with him after some persuasion. Her house sat on the outskirts of town, surrounded by overgrown bushes and ivy-covered walls. Inside, the air smelled faintly of lavender and old wood. Ruth greeted Henry warmly, inviting him to sit at her kitchen table while she brewed tea. "I remember Emily well," Ruth said softly, stirring sugar into her cup. "She was a sweet girl, full of dreams, but she lived under a shadow, one cast by her father." Ruth hesitated, choosing her words carefully. He was difficult, controlling. People whispered about him, about how he treated her. No one dared intervene, though. He was powerful, you understand? Henry nodded slowly, piecing together what she was saying. So Emily's father had been abusive. That explained why she might have wanted to escape. But how did the order fit into all this? Ruth leaned closer, lowering her voice. "Emily didn't drown, Mr. Thompson. She faked her own death to get away from him. She thought disappearing would keep her safe, but she was wrong." Henry's pulse quickened. What happened after she faked her death? Ruth sighed heavily, her gaze dropping to the table. She left town for a while, started a new life, somewhere else, but she missed Willow Creek. Eventually, she came back, quietly, secretly, and that's when things went wrong again. She vanished shortly after returning. No one knows what happened to her. Some say the order found her. Others believe she ran away again. The room fell silent except for the ticking of the clock on the wall. Henry felt a mix of emotions: anger, sadness, determination. Emily's story wasn't over yet. Somewhere, somehow, the truth still existed, and Henry vowed to find it. That night, unable to sleep, Henry sat at his desk, poring over everything he'd learned so far. The empty coffin, Margaret's diary, Ruth's revelations. It all pointed to one conclusion. Emily Carter had been running from something, or someone, for most of her life. Whether she was alive or dead remained unclear. But one thing was certain: Henry wasn't going to stop until he uncovered the whole truth. The next morning, Henry woke up with a renewed sense of purpose. The pieces of Emily's story were slowly coming together, but they still didn't form a complete picture. He knew he needed to dig deeper, literally and figuratively. The clues Ruth had shared about Emily faking her death and returning to Willow Creek only to vanish again gnawed at him. What had happened during those missing years? And why did the Order seem to be at the center of everything? Henry decided to revisit Margaret's diary, hoping it might hold more answers. Back in his attic, sunlight streamed through the small window, illuminating the dusty corners where forgotten memories lay hidden. He opened the diary once more, flipping through its pages carefully. This time he paid closer attention to the entries that mentioned the Order. Margaret hadn't gone into great detail, but there were hints, a name here, a cryptic phrase there, that suggested she knew more than she let on. One particular passage stood out. Tonight I saw men in hoods near the river. They carried lanterns, moving silently like shadows. I heard whispers about the girl. Could they mean Emily? Henry's heart raced as he read the words over and over. Who were these hooded figures? And what connection did they have to Emily? It sounded sinister, almost otherworldly, but Henry reminded himself that this wasn't some supernatural tale. It was real life, albeit a dark and twisted version of it. Determined to learn more, Henry decided to visit the riverbank mentioned in the diary. It was the same spot where Emily was said to have drowned, though now he suspected that was just part of the cover-up. As he drove toward the location, the road grew narrower, flanked by towering trees whose branches intertwined overhead, creating a canopy of green. The air felt heavier here, charged with an unspoken tension. When he arrived, Henry parked his car and stepped out, taking in the serene yet eerie beauty of the place. The river flowed gently, its surface shimmering under the midday sun. Birds chirped in the distance, but otherwise the area was eerily quiet. Henry walked along the bank, scanning the ground for anything unusual. He noticed strange markings carved into the trunks of nearby trees, symbols that looked deliberate rather than random. They resembled the ones Margaret had described seeing near the hooded figures. A chill ran down Henry's spine as he realized these symbols could be connected to the Order. Were they some kind of warning, or perhaps a way to mark their territory? Whatever the case, it was clear that this place held significance beyond being the supposed site of Emily's drowning. Henry pulled out his phone and snapped pictures of the carvings, determined to research them later. As he continued exploring, something caught his eye, a glint of metal half buried in the dirt near the water's edge. Kneeling down, Henry brushed away the soil to reveal an old locket. His hands trembled as he opened it. Inside was a faded photograph of Emily, smiling brightly, her eyes full of life. On the back of the photo, written in delicate handwriting, were the words, "Forgive me." Henry stared at the locket, his mind racing. Why would Emily leave such a message? Was it meant for someone specific? Or was it a plea to whoever found it? The discovery left him feeling both closer to the truth and further from understanding it. Each new clue seemed to raise more questions than answers. Back home, Henry spent hours poring over books and online resources, trying to make sense of the symbols he'd photographed. After several fruitless searches, he stumbled upon an obscure article about secret societies in rural America. One section described a group known for using similar symbols to mark their meeting places or rituals. According to the article, these groups often operated in secrecy, wielding influence over local communities while remaining untouchable to outsiders. Could this be the Order Margaret and Ruth had spoken of? If so, how far did their reach extend? And what role had they played in Emily's disappearance? The more Henry learned, the darker the picture became. These weren't just harmless gatherings of eccentric individuals. They were organizations built on control, manipulation, and fear. Driven by a mix of determination and dread, Henry decided to confront the people who might know more. He made a list of names mentioned in Margaret's diary and set out to track them down. Most were elderly residents who had lived in Willow Creek for decades. Some refused to speak, their faces pale with fear when he brought up the order. Others hinted at things without saying them outright, their voices trembling as if afraid of being overheard. One man, however, agreed to talk. Walter Jenkins was a retired schoolteacher in his late 70s, known for his love of history and storytelling. When Henry knocked on his door, Walter greeted him warmly, inviting him inside. Over cups of tea, Henry explained what he'd uncovered so far: the empty coffin, the diary, the symbols, the locket. Walter listened intently, nodding occasionally. When Henry finished, Walter sighed deeply, leaning back in his chair. "I've heard stories about the Order," he admitted. "They've been around for generations, always working in the shadows. People feared them, not because of violence necessarily, but because of what they could take away. Jobs, homes, reputations. If you crossed them, your life would fall apart." "But why target Emily?" Henry asked, frustration creeping into his voice. "What did she do to deserve this?" Walter hesitated before answering. "It wasn't about what she did. It was about what she knew. Emily was smart, observant. She saw things others missed. When she came back to town, she must have stumbled onto something big, something the Order didn't want exposed." Henry felt a surge of anger. How could anyone justify silencing a young girl for simply knowing too much? Yet, deep down, he understood. Power like that didn't tolerate threats, no matter how innocent. Still, it wasn't enough to piece together the full story. He needed concrete evidence, something tangible that could prove the Order's involvement. That night, unable to sleep, Henry sat at his desk, staring at the locket. Something about it nagged at him, as if it held another secret waiting to be uncovered. Carefully, he examined it again, running his fingers over its edges. That's when he noticed a tiny hinge on the side, almost invisible unless you looked closely. Heart pounding, Henry pried it open further, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside was a folded piece of paper. Unfolding it, Henry found a handwritten note. The handwriting was shaky, as if written in haste. "If you're reading this, I'm already gone. Don't trust anyone. They'll never let me leave." Below the message was a crude map, marked with an X near a cluster of trees deep in the forest. Henry's breath caught in his throat. This wasn't just a desperate goodbye. It was a cry for help. Whoever had taken Emily wanted her silenced, permanently, but she had fought back in her own way, leaving behind a trail for someone to follow. Now, it was up to Henry to pick up where she left off. The next day, armed with the map and a backpack filled with supplies, Henry ventured into the forest. The journey was arduous, the dense foliage making it difficult to navigate. Branches scratched at his arms and the ground was uneven, forcing him to watch every step. Despite the challenges, he pressed on, driven by the hope that he might finally uncover the truth. After hours of trekking, Henry reached the spot marked on the map. It was a clearing surrounded by towering trees, their branches intertwining above like a natural cathedral. In the center stood an old cabin, its wooden walls warped and gray with age. The sight sent a shiver down his spine. This was it. The place Emily had tried to lead him to. Approaching cautiously, Henry noticed strange symbols carved into the trees surrounding the cabin, identical to the ones he'd seen by the river. A cold breeze swept through the clearing, carrying with it the faint scent of earth and decay. Taking a deep breath, Henry pushed open the creaky door and stepped inside. What he found would change everything he thought he knew about Emily and about Willow Creek itself. The cabin was dimly lit, its interior bathed in shadows cast by the late afternoon sun filtering through cracks in the warped wooden walls. The air inside was thick with dust and the faint smell of mildew, as though no one had entered this place in years. Henry stood frozen for a moment, his heart pounding in his chest. Every creak of the floorboards beneath his feet felt like an intrusion, a disruption of secrets long buried. He glanced around cautiously, taking in the details of the space. The room was small and sparsely furnished, with a rickety table pushed against one wall, a single chair overturned on the floor, and shelves lined with jars containing unidentifiable contents. But what caught his attention most were the symbols, etched into the walls, dark swirling patterns that seemed to pulse with an ominous energy. They matched the ones he'd seen near the river and outside the cabin, but here they were more elaborate, almost forming sentences or codes. Henry's eyes darted to the far corner of the room where a pile of old blankets lay crumpled on the ground. Something about them didn't sit right. Moving closer, he knelt down and gently pulled back the fabric, revealing a trapdoor embedded in the floor. His pulse quickened. This had to be it. The reason Emily had marked this location on her map. Whatever she wanted him to find was hidden below. With some effort, Henry managed to pry the trapdoor open, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. He hesitated for a moment, the weight of what he might discover pressing heavily on him. But there was no turning back now. Grabbing his flashlight, he descended step by step, each one groaning under his weight. At the bottom, he found himself in a cramped underground chamber, its low ceiling supported by rotting beams. The beam of his flashlight illuminated shelves, stacked with files, boxes, and strange artifacts, objects that looked out of place in such a remote setting. Henry's hands trembled as he began examining the items. Among them, he found journals, photographs, and documents tied together with fraying string. One box contained newspaper clippings dating back decades, all neatly organized and annotated in handwriting that wasn't Emily's. Another held ledger books filled with names, dates, and cryptic notes. It was clear someone had gone to great lengths to document something. But what? Then he saw it, a leather-bound journal resting on a dusty table at the center of the room. Its cover bore the initials EC in faded gold lettering. Emily. Carter. Henry's breath hitched as he picked it up, running his fingers over the worn surface. This was hers. Opening it carefully, he began reading, his mind racing to keep up with the revelations within. Emily's entries painted a harrowing picture of her life after faking her death. She wrote of living in constant fear, moving from town to town under assumed identities while trying to stay one step ahead of those who sought to silence her. Her words were raw and desperate, capturing both her resilience and her despair. In one passage, she described how she'd returned to Willow Creek because she couldn't bear to be away from the only home she'd ever known. But instead of finding peace, she uncovered something far worse. I thought I could come back without anyone noticing, she wrote. But they're everywhere, watching, listening. I don't know how they found me, but they did. Now I can't leave again. They've made sure of that. Henry's stomach churned as he read on. Emily detailed how she'd stumbled upon evidence of the Order's activities during her brief return to Willow Creek. According to her, the group wasn't just a local power structure. It was part of a larger network operating across the country. Their goal? To control land, resources, and people, using manipulation and fear to maintain their grip on power. Emily claimed she'd uncovered plans for illegal land acquisitions, environmental destruction, and even blackmail campaigns targeting prominent figures in nearby towns. But the most chilling revelation came toward the end of the journal. Emily described being followed, threatened, and eventually captured by members of the Order. She believed they intended to use her as leverage against her father, whose abusive behavior had once shielded him from scrutiny. They think I'm weak, she wrote bitterly, but I'll never let them win. Henry closed the journal, his hands shaking. The pieces of the puzzle were finally falling into place. Emily hadn't simply vanished. She'd been taken, and whoever had imprisoned her had done so not just to silence her, but to protect the dark secrets she'd uncovered. But where was she now? Was she still alive? As if in answer to his thoughts, a sound echoed above him, a faint creak followed by muffled voices. Henry froze, his blood turning cold. Someone else was in the cabin. Heart pounding, he extinguished his flashlight and pressed himself against the wall, straining to listen. The voices grew louder, speaking in hushed tones he couldn't quite make out. Then came the unmistakable sound of footsteps descending the stairs. Panic surged through Henry. Whoever these people were, they weren't friendly. He needed to act fast. Scanning the room, he spotted a narrow passageway leading off to one side, partially concealed by a stack of crates. Without hesitation, he slipped into the shadows, praying the intruders wouldn't notice the disturbance. The footsteps grew closer, accompanied by the flickering glow of a lantern. 3 figures entered the chamber, their faces obscured by hoods. One carried a ledger similar to the ones Henry had seen earlier, while another held a bundle of papers. The third figure spoke in a low, commanding voice. "We need to secure everything before anyone else finds it. If word gets out..." The sentence trailed off, but Henry didn't need to hear the rest. These were members of the Order, and they were cleaning up loose ends. His presence here was dangerous, not just for him but potentially for Emily wherever she was. As quietly as possible, Henry crept further into the passageway, following it until it opened into another small room. Inside, he found chains bolted to the wall, and faint traces of dirt and debris that suggested someone had recently been held there. His mind raced. Had Emily been imprisoned here? If so, where was she now? And why had the Order moved her? Before he could dwell on the questions, the sound of footsteps approaching snapped him back to reality. He needed to leave. Now. Slipping back through the passageway, Henry waited until the coast was clear before making his way back upstairs. Once outside, he ran as fast as he could, putting as much distance between himself and the cabin as possible. Only when he reached the safety of his car did he allow himself to breathe again. Sitting behind the wheel, Henry stared at the journal in his lap. He knew he couldn't stop now. Emily's story wasn't just a tragedy, it was a call to action. She had risked everything to expose the truth, and now it was his responsibility to finish what she started. With renewed determination, Henry vowed to uncover the full extent of the Order's crimes and bring justice to the girl who had fought so hard to survive. Little did he know, the journey ahead would test him in ways he couldn't yet imagine. Henry drove home with his mind racing, replaying the events of the day over and over. The journal, the hidden bunker, the hooded figures. It all felt like something out of a movie, but it was painfully real. Emily's words echoed in his head. "They'll never let me leave." Who were they? And why had they gone to such lengths to keep her silenced? The questions swirled endlessly, each one more unsettling than the last. But Henry knew one thing for certain. He couldn't. Stop now. He owed it to Emily, and to himself, to uncover the truth. When he arrived home, Henry locked the front door behind him and collapsed onto the couch, clutching the journal tightly. His hands were still trembling from the adrenaline rush of narrowly escaping the cabin. Every creak of the house made him jump, his nerves on edge as if someone might burst through the door at any moment. But he forced himself to focus. This wasn't just about solving a mystery anymore. It was about exposing a conspiracy that had festered in Willow Creek for decades. He opened the journal again, flipping through its pages slowly, absorbing every detail. Emily's handwriting was shaky in places, betraying the fear she must have felt while writing. She described being followed, constantly after returning to Willow Creek, unable to shake the feeling that eyes were always watching her. At first she thought she was imagining things, but then came the threats, notes left on her doorstep, strange phone calls late at night, even graffiti scrawled across her car. The message was clear: stay quiet, or else. What struck Henry most was how calculated the Order's actions seemed. They hadn't acted impulsively. They'd methodically worn Emily down until she had no choice but to comply. And yet, despite everything, she refused to back down. Her final entries were filled with defiance, vowing to expose their crimes no matter the cost. That courage inspired Henry. If Emily could face such danger head-on, so could he. But where to start? The journal contained fragments of information, names, locations, vague references, but nothing concrete enough to take directly to the authorities. Henry knew he needed hard evidence if he wanted to bring the Order to justice. So he began, piecing together the clues, cross-referencing what Emily had written with the documents he'd found in the bunker. One name appeared repeatedly: Victor Hargrove. According to Emily, Hargrove was a high-ranking member of the Order and one of the key players orchestrating their operations in Willow Creek. A quick search online revealed that Hargrove owned several businesses in town, including the local lumber mill and a construction company. On the surface, he seemed like a respected community leader, but Henry suspected there was more beneath the polished exterior. Determined to learn more, Henry decided to pay Hargrove a visit. It was risky, but he reasoned that sometimes you had to get close to your enemies to understand them. Early the next morning, he drove to Hargrove's office, located in a sleek glass building downtown. The receptionist greeted him warmly, though. Her smile faltered slightly when he asked to see Mr. Hargrove. "I'm sorry, sir," she said, glancing nervously at the closed door behind her. "Mr. Hargrove doesn't take unscheduled appointments. Is there something I can help you with?" Henry hesitated, thinking quickly. "Actually, yes. I'm working on a project about Willow Creek's history, and I heard Mr. Hargrove is quite knowledgeable about the town's past. Just 5 minutes of his time would be incredibly helpful." The receptionist frowned, clearly unsure, but eventually nodded. "Let me check with him." A few tense moments later, she returned, motioning for Henry to follow her. As they approached Hargrove's office, Henry noticed the heavy security measures: cameras mounted on the walls, a keypad locking the door, and 2 burly men standing guard outside. His stomach churned, but he kept his expression calm as he stepped inside. Victor Hargrove was seated behind a massive mahogany desk, his piercing blue eyes studying Henry intently. He looked every bit the powerful businessman, dressed in an expensive suit with a confident smirk playing on his lips. "So," he said smoothly, gesturing for Henry to sit, "you're interested in our little town's history?" "That's right," Henry replied, forcing a friendly tone. "I've been digging into some old records and came across your name. You've done a lot for Willow Creek over the years." Hargrove chuckled, leaning back in his chair. "Well, I do what I can. This town has been good to me, and I try to give back whenever possible." Henry nodded, pretending to scribble notes. "That's admirable. Speaking of which, I recently stumbled upon some interesting stories about unusual groups operating around here. Ever heard of anything like that?" For a split second, Hargrove's mask slipped. His jaw tightened ever so slightly before his practiced smile returned. "Unusual groups? Can't say I have. People love spinning tales, though. You know how small towns are." Henry pressed on, careful not to push too hard. "Right, of course. Still, I can't help but wonder, what kind of impact do you think these rumors have on the town's reputation? Do you think they're harmless, or could they cause trouble?" Hargrove's gaze sharpened, his voice dropping a fraction. "Rumors are dangerous things, Mr. Thompson. They spread fear, divide communities. Best to leave them alone. Wouldn't you agree?" It wasn't a direct threat, but the implication was clear. "Tread carefully." Henry thanked Hargrove for his time and left the office, his heart pounding. The encounter only deepened his resolve. Hargrove was hiding something. That much was obvious, and Henry intended to find out exactly what. Over the next few days, Henry pored over the documents he'd taken from the bunker, searching for connections between Hargrove and the Order. Buried within the ledgers were lists of payments made to various individuals, along with cryptic notes about silencing dissent and securing assets. One entry stood out: a large sum transferred to a property owner near the forest, accompanied by the note, "EC, secured." Henry's pulse quickened. Could this be where Emily was being held? He traced the location on a map and discovered it corresponded to an isolated farmhouse miles outside of town. With no other leads to go on, he decided to investigate. The drive to the farmhouse was long and lonely, the road winding through dense woods until civilization faded completely. When he finally arrived, the sight sent a chill down his spine. The house was dilapidated, its windows boarded up and its roof sagging under years of neglect. Yet there were signs of recent activity: a fresh tire track in the dirt driveway, cigarette butts scattered near the porch. Henry parked his car out of sight and approached cautiously, keeping low to avoid detection. Peering through a gap in the boards covering one window, he saw movement inside. Faint voices drifted through the walls, muffled but urgent. Summoning his courage, he tried the front door. It was unlocked. Inside, the air was stale and oppressive, the scent of decay clinging to every surface. Henry moved quietly, following the sound of voices until he reached a closed door at the end of a narrow hallway. Pressing his ear against it, he heard snippets of conversation. "Can't risk exposure," and "She knows too much." His blood ran cold. This was it. Pushing the door open just a crack, he peered inside and froze. There, chained to the wall, sat Emily Carter. She was thin and pale, her once vibrant eyes now hollow with exhaustion. But she was alive. Tears pricked at Henry's eyes as relief washed over him. He had found her. Now he just had to get her out.